Brian Keane, welcome to the studio. Welcome to the podcast.
Anthony, thank you so much. This studio is absolutely insane. I'm so
Man,
glad.
The myth, the legend.
Mate, excited for this. We did a great episode on my podcast, going through some incredible stuff in this phenomenal studio. So yeah, looking forward to this. Technically around 2.
I wonder what's the release. Are we going to get, we'll talk about it off air and figure out, we're going to get mine out and we'll figure out some sort of cross-pollination, because I think there's going to be a lot of crossover between the two conversations and maybe even taking up and continuing some of the themes we explored upon on your podcast and elaborating them and unpacking them a little bit further on this one. One of them we touched on was habits, and we talked about this idea of, I think you said something like, show me a man, I don't know the future, but show me a man's habits and I'll show you the future. I've had a chance to watch you grow from a distance. You were on my podcast, it's probably 2 years ago.
I say it was about that, yeah.
And since then, you know, not I've been stalking you, but I've been...
You've been stalking a little bit. I stalk as well, so it's fine.
I tune in a little bit and go, Jesus, Brian's doing well for himself. Like, he's having great guests. It looks like he's having great growth. Courses look like they're going better than ever. If you were to attribute it to one or two key habits in that time, what are they? What do they look like?
Over the last 2 years in specific, I think if we go off the last 2 years, because the really unsexy one that everyone will preach is the consistency element. Like, I started the podcast, the Brian Keane podcast, in 2016, and there's been an episode every single Monday for, you know, coming up to 10 years. So that's so unsexy. When someone's like, how do you grow a massive podcast? I'm like, be early and be consistent.
2016 was super early.
It was early. It wasn't quite hours in the back early, but it was early. And I was able to kind of platform grab a little bit. So I have people that are obviously new listening to the podcast, and then I've got people that have been there since day one and have been able to grow it from that. The last 2 years in particular, though, it's weird because a lot has changed in the last 2 years. My life has changed dramatically. A couple of big things changed. My dad got sick, then thankfully got better. I was engaged and we broke up. I traveled around. I kind of left some of the more extreme ultra endurance things I was doing to try and focus on a bit more of a longevity approach when it came to my training. So a lot has changed. But I started to meditate over the last 2 years, which has actually really helped with business, because, you know, you had a great line right before we came on air. I think it's from Viktor Frankl, that in the space between stimulus and response, or in the gap between stimulus and response, there's a space, and in that space we get a choice. What meditation has allowed me to do is allowed me to get very clear on what I should be doing and who I should be serving, because I have a little bit of shiny object syndrome. It's probably the best thing about my personality, but also the worst thing, that ADHD. I have it with training. Like, you look at my training, I'm doing high rocks, I'm doing bodybuilding, I'm doing S&C, I'm playing football, I'm playing soccer, I'm jumping around, I'm cycling, I'm doing a lot of different things because I get really bad training ADHD and get really bored if I don't mix it up. Same thing can happen in business, where I will jump around in a lot of different things. And what meditation over the last 2 years has allowed me to get clearer on is who I should be serving, how I should be serving them, and how I should be showing up. So I actually look like I'm doing a lot more online and doing a lot more than I am. And don't get me wrong, I'm good with time management and I'm extremely good with energy management. So I'm able to get really good podcast guests because of our filtering process. I know who's listening to the podcast, so it makes it easier to filter. Same with my mentorships, my consulting for business. I have a pull style marketing. I don't cold DM people. I don't message people to tell them to work with me. It's those who have already decided through listening to my content, reading my books, that's the coach I want for business, or that's the coach I want for fitness. That's the program I want to do because Brian's created it. They're the people that are coming into my ecosystem. So what that's doing is giving me a lot of options and choice, because I have that financial freedom to reinvest it back in if I want to, into areas that I want to grow. And meditation's been kind of the foundation for that, because instead of getting shiny object and going, I'm going to build this, I'm going to build that, I double down on the things that are working. I put everything through the filter of, will this nourish me or will this deplete me? And then the things that are nourishing me I do more of, and the things that are depleting me I do less of, and that leads to just more output over time. Yeah,
so many people refuse to lean into where their competitive advantage is. Like, my competitive advantage is in cycling. That comes a little bit easier. I'm a better network there, I have maybe a little bit of talent there, I've spent a lot of time there. The easy thing for me isn't to recreate this into a triathlon podcast or a running podcast. It's to stay on cycling, but you need it's a unique mindset that can, because I almost feel like growth's like or building a business is like that attention curve, where it's high at the start, it's high at the end because you're close to getting that big exit or wherever that shiny object is. But the middle is the real dip off, unglamorous part. And meditation's a tool that I've heard a lot of people talking about, and I've dabbled with it, and I've even tried to force myself through like sensory deprivation tanks. Have you tried these?
Yeah, they're amazing. I love them.
Brilliant. But I feel like that's a little bit of a cop out for meditation. It's like you're not disciplined enough to actually meditate. You need to enforce like a constraint on you to meditate. How do I transition from, you know, having a dabbling interest in meditation to, because I've heard it's so transformative from so many people, but I've never actually just managed to get it as a solid practice.
Yeah, I think what you're doing, I think understanding what you should feel and the target you're trying to hit is the most important thing. And what a sensory deprivation tank or a float tank can do, it can show you what it's like to be in a very meditative state. It's kind of like using a pre-workout or caffeine before a long bike ride or a gym session. It shows you how fast you can go, how much power you can go because of the stimulant. And it shows you how much you can lift in the gym because of the pre-workout in your system. It's not that you've now become a lifter that goes from squatting 100 kilos to 120. The pre-workout made you put 20 kilos on the bar because you're like, give me more weight. I want to go longer. But what it's done is it's set a new normal bar. So you know at least the target is there, that I can actually hit this under the right conditions. With meditation, I feel as a focus group of one, the sensory deprivation tank can be like a bridge because you know that this is what you're trying to achieve. So when you're sitting with meditation yourself, you can go, okay, well, I'm trying to achieve this. What's the environment I need to create to hit this? For me, it's I burn incense, which can super woo and hip, but I burn my incense. I have normally a frequency or a meditative based guided YouTube video on. I have something over my eyes, and then I normally have like a lamp in front of me that's a focus point if I take my cap off or my blindfold off, and depending on what I need on the day. I've tried apps. I've tried the Calm app. I've tried Headspace. I tried different guided meditations. I tried different music. I tried loads of different things. And it wasn't until I found the thing that worked for me. And it was just that. It was the music and the understanding that the target I'm trying to hit is a non-judgment of thoughts coming into my head. It's kind of like if you're on a riverbank and there's fish jumping by and you're trying to grasp the fish, that's your thoughts.
Yeah.
And instead of trying to grasp the fish, I just let them jump. And it's hard in the beginning. I think Naval Ravikant had a great line that meditation is like your inbox. You might have 1,000 unopened emails in your inbox, but eventually if you keep opening the emails, i.e. the thoughts coming through, it'll get to inbox 0, and then it becomes easier, and then you just stay on top of inbox 0. That's how it's been for me personally.
Yeah, because I hear people talking about, you know, cycling or running is a meditative state. Like for me, it's not. Like it's I'm very focused on the thing I'm doing, cycling, but that doesn't make it meditative. Like
it's mindfulness at best, really.
Yeah, you're like, I don't know, when you hit over zone 3 heart rate, you're just on the effort. Like you're not letting anything, it feels like the opposite of meditation. Instead of opening myself to all these thoughts, I'm totally closing myself to any thought, only this single thought of focusing on the effort. You've played around with chemically altered, exploring beyond consciousness a little bit, DMT, ayahuasca.
I have done several ayahuascas. I've done not DMT, but I've done Bufo Olivares, which is
that's how cool that is.
Yeah. So there's, if you think of DMT, the 3 forms that are prominent that people are aware of, and I'm not an expert. This is a focus group of one based on what I've been told by shamans. Ayahuasca is the short form, or the long form, i.e., you know, it's a several hour experience with DMT. DMT then is the moderate form, takes 20 minutes, and Bufo is the extreme version of DMT. So Bufo is the scariest thing I've ever done in my life. Bufo is fucking terrifying. So
what sort of forms or what do you do?
So it's like you're smoking a crack pipe. So it's toad venom from the Amazon, and what it does is there's a great book by Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind, a book on psychedelics, and he talks about Bufo Olivares and that. So I'm stealing the line directly from him, that with ayahuasca, there's still a you, there's still an I, there's still a Brian, there's still an Anthony. With Bufo, there's no you. You're returned to the center of the universe, or you return to some other area of consciousness where there's no you, and then you get shot back into the world, and it's fucking terrifying. Now, it's beautiful and incredible because it's a disconnection from reality. Now, with psychedelics and plant medicines, I'm not recommending them. I'm also not an expert on them, because you have people who are saying you're connected in with different frequencies of consciousness. Others are saying that it's chemicals that your brain is just making up itself, and you're able to go on what path you need. But it really doesn't matter if you're getting the healing out of it and the work that you need to work through, the stuff that's holding you back. it doesn't matter how you get to the outcome as long as you get there. But your ayahuasca, your DMT, your bufo are all on that same path. So I've done ayahuasca and I've done mushrooms a couple of times, and they're incredible experiences if you go in with a good intention and you've got a guided shaman, assuming that you've been pre-qualified to do them. That if you have histories of schizophrenia or histories of mental illness, you should either proceed with caution or avoid them completely, but a good reputable shaman or someone guiding the experience will tell you all that beforehand.
Yeah, if you're getting your medical advice off me or you're in a bad spot.
Yeah, don't fucking listen to me on medical advice. Definitely don't. Yeah.
But were they a response to, like, when I look at your life, it looks super planned out. You're goal orientated, whether it's back to your bodybuilding days or it's building businesses or getting ready for Marathon des Sables. You're very goal orientated. So you have your whole path laid out. You're engaged, you're building your life in Galway. The path ahead, it's pretty clear. You know the direction you're moving. And then whatever happened in your personal life, you and your partner decide to split, you're on a totally different path. Was the ayahuasca meditation, was that to help you make sense of that?
Yeah, so my first experience with ayahuasca was 2022. And it was more curiosity to see what the plant would do, how the medicine would work. And I'd listened to lots of podcasts with people speaking about it. It piqued my curiosity. That was my first experience with it. My next experience with it was off the back of a really bad breakup. It was a relationship that just didn't work out. We were engaged, and realistically, I've nothing but a very wonderful person, but completely different versions of what we wanted life to look like. And it didn't make sense to be together on that path. But it didn't make a breakup any easier, because breakups are hard. They're so hard. It's one of the most heartbreaking things anyone can go through. It's because it's grief. You know, grief of a loved one, grief of a relationship, grief of a version of life that you thought was going to happen for somebody that was supposed to be, or what you thought was going to be a main character in your story that turned out just to be a chapter. That's a very difficult grieving process.
It's almost like a debt. Like, you go from seeing, like, my ex-girlfriend, you go from seeing her every single day, every single thing you do is entwined to flick of a switch, and you never see that person again.
It's incredible. It's nearly the only thing in life where that happens. Like, you have someone that is, as you said, you see every day, that you're normally quite intimate with every day, and then click of a finger, they're gone. That's why it's so difficult for people. And like, I turned to alcohol, I was fucking smoking way too much weed. I then turned to overtraining. I was just trying to make the pain go away. And it got to the point where I was like, I can't keep doing this. And then I went back to ayahuasca. I remember it was funny because my shamans are in Mallorca in Spain, and I messaged on a Tuesday. So something happened on a Tuesday night with me and my ex-girlfriend that just spun me out of control. We were broken up several months, but I was under the illusion that we were working on things, and just a few things happened that didn't go as planned. And I was cracking up. I was like lying on my bathroom floor, bawling my eyes out, couldn't get up. I just felt fucking destroyed, and that I was just broken into a million different pieces. And for some reason I got up and I messaged my shamans who were in Mallorca. This was on a Tuesday. The retreat was on a Thursday. And when I went in 2022, I did a podcast on my experience. I didn't mention the crowd or the retreats that I was at, but I said, anyone that wants information, send my assistant an email and he'll send them back to you. So they sold out the rest of the year. So I messaged the shamans and I said, do you have any space for Thursday? They were like, is this Brian from the podcast? I said, yeah, we'll find a space. I said, we'll find a space. So I flew out, and then that was my next experience with it again, and helped me move through. And this isn't a recommendation to do ayahuasca if you're going through a grieving process or a breakup. But for me, that's what helped. And it kind of got me from 0 to 1, because ayahuasca, if you're in the right place to receive it, particularly from my experience, focus group of 1, and you trust and surrender to it, it's kind of like having 10 years of therapy with a therapist that knows you better than yourself over a weekend.
Yeah. And
that can be really transformative and healing if you're in the right place to accept the messages.
We still have done so little research, or there's so little support out there for moving past that end of relationship. I don't think there's a good way to do it. Like, you leaned kind of into alcohol, into, you know, weed. Definitely when I ended my last relationship, my friends would be joking, saying, like, you're almost afraid to be on your own. And I was dating like twice a day, every day. Like I was on flat out on Tinder, so I days mapped out. And I remember being on a date one time, and I had in the back of my phone, I had a little post-it note with like Monday, and then I'd have my 3 dates for Monday on it, and Tuesday my 3 dates, and I was fiddling with my phone or something, and the little post-it came out. She's like, "Oh, what's all that?" And I'd be like, you know, Monica AM, so it'd be breakfast, lunch, dinner every single day. And looking back, so dysfunctional, but didn't have a framework or an infrastructure for dealing with grief. And you know, I didn't have a shaman to text.
It's so interesting. When you were on my podcast, we talked about self-created prisons around training, around work, around when you were in law. Breakups and the way we react can feel like self-created prisons as well, i.e. the 3 dates a day. For me, it was, you know, drinking too much, smoking too much, training too much, just trying to process the pain. One of the podcasts I did...
But almost, sorry to cut across there, but almost process the pain by not allowing yourself to feel the pain. Like you're just staying busy or dull senses.
Let me reframe. I wasn't processing any pain. I was I was trying to not feel the pain. Yeah. And it was so funny because what you resist persists and what you accept dissolves. And I had a podcast with David Kessler. I don't know if you know David Kessler. No. So he's the world's leading expert on grief. And I had him on the podcast, and he had a great line about, have you ever heard about buffaloes in a storm?
No.
So in storm conditions, during hurricanes, tornadoes, storms, buffaloes move towards storms because the sooner they get into the eye of the storm, the faster they're through it. And he said grieving is like that. Most people run away from the storm, where when you're trying to grieve, you move towards the storm because it's harder in the beginning, but you move through it quicker.
That's a brilliant saying. Buffaloes and storm. I'm definitely going to keep that one. How do you, in that time, because you've different, I love the idea of privacy, because privacy for me means you get to show which version of yourself you want to the appropriate person. I'm a different person with my fiance Sarah than I am with my parents, than I am on the podcast. So it's selective curation of your life's news feed is privacy for me. But you kept a lot of this, from what I can see, off your social feeds. How do you stop it infecting your mindset when it comes to work and sport? Like, does self-doubt start to creep in, and, you know, am I flawed? Am I good enough?
Well, I know I'm flawed. So straight off the bat, that makes it easy to come to terms with. I don't think anybody is perfect. And when it comes to self-doubt, it's interesting because one of the things I got very mindful of in probably the last 5-6 years is with social media. And it's weird because we do similar things in terms of a public profile. We try and serve people in different spaces, but we have YouTube and Instagram and podcasts. So there's a lot of information out there. One of my mentors said to me years ago, whatever you give people, they'll take. And one of the things that would have made a breakup horrible would have been having to do it publicly.
Yeah.
But I never put my fiance, and I've got a new girlfriend now who's incredible. Like, so grateful for the experience in that relationship because it leads you to be curative of who it is you should be with. With my ex-partner, wonderful person, but we never made any sense on paper, ever. Like, you take away the love, that relationship never made any sense. And I didn't know that when you're in it. Similar to when you were on my podcast talking about the businesses that were making you miserable because you were working all the time, doing all these things. You don't realize that you're not happy until you're removed from it and you look back in hindsight. And the seeds of failure, planting trees for future success. I had this when I was a teacher and I set up my own business. I had this in relationship. And during that period of time, the only thing I could say is at least it wasn't public. I don't mind talking about it now from my experience because your mess becomes your message. And I think it's important to speak about it because when I was searching for breakups for men, there was fuck all out there. Little. Very little. Most of it was female based. And not to knock that, there's definitely some benefit that I got from it. But I just wanted a male and a guy to be like, this sucks, but it gets better. And I said, and I knew when I was going through it, because you know this based on choosing your suffering and being a professional athlete and doing a master's in law and all these extreme things that are really suffering based, you'll back yourself that you'll come out of these difficult times. And I knew even in the most difficult time, I would eventually come out of it. And I said when I would pay it forward and say it, because it's so weird. I do a lot of fitness content and nutrition and mindset. And the episodes that I've talked about grieving a breakup is the ones I'll get the most messages on from guys who are like, this is killing me now. I'm so glad I'm not the only one.
Because there's not a lot of modern voices in the... Masculinity's been kind of under attack for the last decade. Like, it's almost, you need to be apologetic for being a man. And then as a result of that, we seen fringe and, to my mind, pretty unlikable characters emerging, like Andrew Tate, who just looks like a gimp, not someone I would share any values with or would like to go for a beer with. But people have almost, in the search for guidance in a masculinity culture, been forced to fringe characters because it's been so under attack in a moderate voice like yours, who can, you know, bring some masculinity but also bring a little bit of vulnerability with it. I think that's maybe, I'm a big believer in the pendulum swings. The pendulum swung very far in the, it's toxic to be a male, it's toxic to have, you know, testosterone, to enjoy watching violence, and now it's swinging back a little bit more. I'm hopeful for us finding a nice middle ground. At least I'm hopeful.
Well, I think that's harmony in its finest. I think as a society, and I probably am the best person to comment on modern society, but from what I've seen and experienced from conversations with people, particularly high-level people on the podcast, is that pendulum swing, that we tend to overextend as a society in most directions and then go the other direction and then smack in the middle. You see this now on social media with short-form content. Like, when I came online first, it was blogging and it was long-form, and then it swung the other way where it started to go audio-based and long-form, and now it's gone very short-form. So everything in society, from social media to masculinity to the fitness and the, you know, we were talking about skinny talk before this podcast on TikTok, that things tend to swing. There was the body positivity movement, which is amazing. I have a daughter and I want her to be very body positive, but as a health and fitness professional, I'm like, well, I love that you love your body at 20 stone overweight, but you do realize your health markers and your biomarkers and your risk of all cause mortality greatly increase the more weight you have on. So that context got lost for a while, but that body positivity came off the back of the jacked Instagram models, the pretty bikini girls that were everywhere, and now it's starting to balance a little bit back in the middle. I think this is something that just consistently happens as we go through different societal and cultural trends.
But you know what, the jacked dude, the Instagram girl who just looks perfect, you see that, like, it's putting up unrealistic expectations for people, is the criticism or the counterpoint to that. And as someone who spent, you know, a good part of their life chasing pro sport and high performance, I couldn't disagree with that more. That's a very attainable. Being in very good shape is attainable to almost anyone. Being a top 1% performer in the world in your chosen sport is not attainable. We're into genetics. We're into the 1% of the 1%. The only thing that matters there, really, hard work, it's a given. Diet, nailed, is a given. Sleep, nailed, is a given. That's your starting point. Genetics determine the outcomes there. But if you want to look really good at your top off on the beach, you want to be a bikini model, that's attainable to almost anybody with a good strength and conditioning plan, some cardio built into it, and a strict diet.
100%. The thing to counterbalance that with, or not even counterbalance, I think maybe add on to, which is interesting in body composition versus performance, is the cost, because both have a very high cost of entry. You want to be one of the top 1% athletes in the world, you need to have all the things you mentioned, plus look, plus genetics. You want to be in great shape, you still need to pay nearly all that cost of saying no, not missing cardio sessions, counting your calories, your macros. That cost, as somebody that lived it, because I was a professional fitness model for 2 years, I competed in bodybuilding shows, and I was miserable. I said this to you on my podcast. In 2015, you go back on that feed, you see me traveling all around the world, you see me sponsored as an athlete, magazines, competitions, pro cards, medals, trophies, and I was miserable. I had serious body dysmorphia. I had unbelievable disordered eating patterns. I was taking enough stimulants that would knock a baby rhinoceros to try and get my fat levels down and keep them down. And all the off and illegal drugs with fat stimulation and fat burning and stimulants, and the over-the-counter ones, I had every one of them in my system that I could get my hands on because I needed to maintain low levels of body fat. And I was miserable. I wasn't sleeping. I was anxious. I wasn't happy with my life. Nobody sees that. Nobody saw that during that period because I wasn't giving that information to people. I wasn't letting them see. I wasn't admitting it to myself either. And sometimes when people see the Instagram model or the jacked guy, you don't know what it cost to get them there. And you don't know what their relationship is like to themselves. And there might be some that are in amazing shape and they love their life. Amazing. Follow those people and try and replicate what they did. You're going to be limited based on genetics on how quickly you can do it, but you can get into great shape of your version of what that looks like. But not everyone you see online is going to be like that. Not everything that glitters is gold.
We had a period for the entirety of human history where your physique was a reliable indicator of your work ethic, where I could look at you and say, without knowing anything about you, Brian's in shape. He's someone who can delay gratification. He's someone who can show up on a consistent basis, put in work without seeing immediate results. He's someone who is disciplined, is able to not stuff themselves. I think Chris Williamson, who you've had on the podcast, had a quote of, your six pack is a story of all the takeaway you haven't eaten. It's all the nights out you didn't go on. And that's been a reliable signal for us for a long time. And that's quite comforting to have that signal because you can look around and go, I'm with my people. That's the signal. Ozempic has kind of changed that. It's changed our signaling system. And some of the greatest pushback to Ozempic that I've heard so far is from people who are in shape. Because it's lowering their social status. How do you think about Ozempic?
That's a great question, especially about the social status, because I never thought about that, because something I had to make peace with several years ago was not putting my self-worth into how my body composition looked and how lean I was or how big I was. So I had to make a lot of peace with that. So interestingly, in a previous version of myself, in a previous 10 years ago, previous life, what it feels like now, my status would have been tied to how I looked, so I would have felt more threatened by something like Ozempic. My thoughts on it are, they echo Johan Hari. So I've had Johan on the podcast 3 times. Johan's phenomenal. Lost Connection is one of my favorite books about mental health. But he wrote a book on Ozempic because he's on the drug. And he's a journalist, multiple times New York Times bestselling author, incredible person. But he wrote about his experience. And with Ozempic, and I read that book to research for the podcast, it opened up my eyes that it's not all bad, because I went into the book and I went into the research that it was all bad. I went in with a fitness professional lens.
Yeah.
What I started to understand was Ozempic versions of it have been around for a while, and it can be a very good bridge for obese individuals who have exhausted all other methods: training, exercise, nutrition, psychology, coaching, and they just cannot figure out how to get a bit of momentum to get their body fat down. And similar to what I mentioned about the body positivity movement earlier, your all risk health markers of all risk mortality, any health markers, massively decrease or increase depending on the lens based on the amount of weight you have. Ozempic can be a bridge to get people into forming better habits.
Yeah.
That's the 0.5% of people who it's potentially going to be beneficial for. That's not how it's been used as a majority. It's been mostly used by celebrities, people looking to lose weight in the everyday. Ozempic face, Ozempic body is something that trends quite a lot on social now. That not only is something that's a jab and effectively a medication that we don't know what the long-term effects are going to be, it is also reaffirms that the delayed gratification skill that you talked about earlier doesn't need to get used. And delayed gratification is like a muscle. The more you do it, the stronger it gets and the easier it becomes. Ozempic skips that, and you go straight to the cue of bang, jab, not hungry. Johan was talking about that he still ate the same food. He still ate KFC. He just couldn't eat as much of it because he wasn't hungry. That's really worrying, because there's no habitual change behavioral change around food, I think that's really where the danger is, because Ozempic doesn't mean you go from eating McDonald's 3 times a day to eating chicken, broccoli and rice. It means that you go to eating McDonald's twice a day or once a day, and then your calories are lower and your weight drops off. When people have all the information and the side effects of, you know, metallic taste and reduced sex drive and all these other things that can come with it, do you really want to be skinny or a little bit leaner when you've got all these weird side effects that could potentially come with it? There are questions that are worth asking if it's something you're even considering.
Yeah, I think my starting point was very similar to your starting point when I started thinking about it. I've zoomed out a little bit and just thought, does it make people happier? And is there a little bit more love in the world? We talked off air about cycling and how dangerous it is with close passes. A part of that is the close pass. It's not the hate for the cyclists. It's the almost disdain for the life they're living. It's like where we talked about, I was on a road where it just wasn't making me happy. I could see me in another life being that close pass. Fucking cyclists, get out of my way. But, you know, thankfully I pulled myself out of that pit. But somebody's maybe in that pit. They've had a bad day. The economy's not going great. Trump's banging tariffs on everyone. They're stressed out. The news cycle's designed to stress people out, keep cortisol levels high. And I wonder, is this not a weight loss medication? Is this a happiness injection that a bunch of people are taking each month?
It's interesting because the I'll be happy win fallacy has been around since at least the time of the Stoics, and probably before it just wasn't captured.
The hedonic treadmill.
The hedonic treadmill, yeah. The constantly thinking this next thing is going to make me happy. And if you associate weight loss with happiness, Ozempic makes a lot more sense psychologically to people.
Yeah.
And losing weight will fix your weight issue. It won't fix any other issues. And same as when I work with people when they're trying to lose weight and they say, all I want to do is lose 20 pounds. And there's a million ways you can do that. You can take an Ozempic or any skinny jab and potentially lose 20 pounds. You can also work with a coach or work with a friend who's good with this area that'll keep you accountable. Look at your nutrition, move more, exercise, sleep well, and lose that 20 pounds. They're the same outcome, but the process was completely different. One built self-esteem and confidence. The other probably did the opposite. So it's not that the weight loss leads to happiness. It's I don't know if we were talking about South Park before we went on there. I love
Maybe
South
the
Park.
greatest.
Do you remember the episode with the underpants gnomes?
Yes.
One of my favorite episodes of all time, talking about capitalism and what is a fake Starbucks coming into South Park. But there's a scene in Underpants Gnomes where the gnomes, stay with us here, the gnomes in South Park are stealing underpants from the people in South Park. And the boys go downstairs and they go, why are you stealing the underpants? And one of them goes, we've got a 3-step plan. Step 1, steal underpants. Step 2, blank. Equals profit. That's what I feel like the Ozempic is with happiness. It's step 1, lose weight. Step 2, blank. Equals happiness. That plus is how you got there. If you did it with diet, exercise, movement, yeah, you'll equal happiness. You do it with a skinny jab, you may as well just put a cross through that equals, because you're not going to get happy from that over the long term.
Yeah, I would love everybody to have the stuff they're searching for, so you know that's not what actually makes you happy. Like, you know, people will yearn after the big Instagram follow and the big podcast audience, the 6-pack. But I can promise you, having a bigger Instagram account doesn't make you any happy. I've never got up in the morning, flicked open Instagram and thought, oh, I'm way happier because of my Instagram followers. That's just never happened to me. So then it's like, does the 6-pack make you happy, or does who you become in the process? It's like the hero's journey. It's not the journey, it's who. So we've these two stories. So we talked about on your podcast, I shared kind of my origin story where I was, you know, I told the world that I was going out to try and win bike races, that's what I was really after. That was the external journey I told the world. But really the important journey for me was an internal journey where I was trying to be true to this promise I made to myself that I was never going to let my health slip to the point that I'd seen it affect my dad when we were growing up. But I actually think the third journey is a more important one that no one talks about. It's who you become in the process of that internal journey. So having the six pack actually doesn't make you happy. It's the stuff you had to do along the way to get the six pack that makes you happy.
You quoted Chris Williamson earlier, and I'm going to re-quote him because I love his line that not everything that you suffer for is valuable. And that's a really interesting thought process, because the six pack, for someone like me who's always been relatively lean, outside of my competing in bodybuilding where I was extremely lean, I find it very easy to keep a six pack because I don't distribute. A lot of my fat distribution is on my lower back and other areas of my body. It doesn't store in my stomach. So it's a lot easier for me just genetically to walk around with a six pack. And I've had a six pack since I was 15. I sound like one of those dickheads now, but I've had a six pack since I was 16 or 15, and I've kept it. I only lost it temporarily when I lived in the States because I was drinking too much and I was eating fast food for the first time in my life. But outside of that, I've always had a six pack or abs. Somebody else might have to diet hard for 12 weeks to get there. And I don't suffer to have it because of my lifestyle, because of a little bit of a genetic component. Somebody else has to suffer hard for it. So it's not valuable to me because it's not, I don't suffer to get it. I don't struggle to get it. It's easy to get it. The same as somebody else who's just a math whiz. Like, I can barely put two numbers together in my head, because that mental maths is just a block. My brain doesn't do that calculation, whereas somebody else can do 3-4 digits and just bang, 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 bang. So different things. The secret sauce, we talked about this very briefly on my podcast. One of my secret sauces for business that I always tell people is try and find something that you find easy that other people find difficult. That's as close to a secret sauce you'll get in life when it comes to business advice, but it's good all the way through. Some things are going to be very easy to you and you're going to gravitate more towards those. And just because it's extremely difficult or it's suffering for somebody else to get it doesn't make it more or less valuable, because the context really matters here. So I would say in all facets of life, that love and peace you talked about earlier, that is so cliche, but it does come from within. And the person you become because you've put in the work and it was valuable to you, that's what's going to serve you over the long term. And it's easy for me and you to say we've had some external successes on podcasts and competing and when you with biking, etc. But that's the reality. That's so true. And that's why I'm always worried about any form of quick fix. And we're probably preaching to the converted, because people listening know that delayed gratification is a good thing. But if you're in that space, there's domain dependence there. Sometimes we'll delay gratification in business and not do it with food. Yeah. If I have a lot of corporate clients who are incredible at what they do, very financially well off, make great decisions with that area of their life. Some are incredible moms, dads, but their fitness and their health is a low priority value for them. And sometimes it's just shifting that value up, putting habits in place around it, and then putting it on a little bit of a minimum effective dose if you have to, because not everyone has to train and live like a professional athlete, nor should everybody do that. So again, asking the question, but being mindful that this external thing you're hitting might get happiness, but the question isn't whether it'll make you happy. It's will you stay happy? Will you stay fulfilled? Because you'll definitely get happy at some point. You'll be like, fucking delighted. I hit that weight. I hit that Instagram number. I hit that financial target. But then the hedonic treadmill kicks in and then the bar moves.
Yeah, we're on the precipice of quite a strange time, because everyone wants the podium. No one wants to do the work that it takes to get to the podium. What if you could just go straight to the podium? So with Ozempic, you can go straight to the podium. Now we have to debate whether the value is actually the journey and getting to the podium, but no one talked about wanting to do the journey. Everyone just wanted to get straight to the podium. Now they have an outlet to get straight to the podium, but that's somehow diminishing our status as someone who's done the work to get to the podium. I wonder when Ozempic starts going into other areas of life. We touched on AI off air, the intermission between the two podcasts. What if AI now has the same potential to do what Ozempic done to our brands? What if somebody could start a podcast next week with the same listenership that we have? Does that diminish our status? It's not atrophy in our audience. Our audience stays the same, but all of a sudden your buddy who hasn't put in the graft that you have, who hasn't made the sacrifices you have, now he has a platform the same size as you. Does that take away from your sense of self?
Yeah, well, status is a dangerous game to play anyway. You know, Naval has that line that you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. And status is a dangerous game because status is a zero-sum game. For you to raise in status, you have to climb above somebody else. And if you want to play that game by all means play it, but play it to win it and then get the fuck out of it. That's the secret for status, because that, we talk about the hedonic treadmill, that status treadmill just goes faster and faster and faster and faster. And I don't like playing zero-sum games if I can avoid it. It hasn't necessarily even taken away my competitive advantage. I'm actually very competitive with myself. Like I do more high rocks races now versus the endurance stuff, the bodybuilding. And I'm very competitive with myself in terms of making sure I show up for interviews, try to be world class when I'm hosting, when I'm on a show, etc. So I'm very competitive with myself. But they're positive sum games. They're games that I win even if I technically lose. And I try and set up environments like that. And I think with status, whether it's Ozempic, whether it's podcasting, it's a dangerous game to get into in the first place. And if you want to play it, by all means play it, but play it to win it and then get out. I made a choice several years ago to take myself out of that game. I don't want to play that game. I want to play the wealth creation game. I want to play the service game. I want to play the game where I'm having fun. And fitness and work isn't a chore for me. It's fun. They're the games I'm choosing to play, not the status one personally.
But does that come with a maturity? Because I feel like, you know, man never walks in the same river twice, because it's never the same river. It's never the same man. Mm-hmm. I feel like at a stage in my life, I really cared about that. But now I'm back in a similar spot, but in a different stage in my life. I just don't care how much you can bench press. It just doesn't take away from how much I can bench press. I just don't care how much money you're making a month. It just doesn't affect how much money I'm making a month.
That's maturity though. And I'd love to go back to a younger self, but I wouldn't have listened, Anthony. My 27-year-old self, 25-year-old self was all about the status, all about doing my thing. So I wouldn't have listened. Even if I was listening to this podcast with 37-year-old Brian, I'd be like, I know, I'm still going to go chase it anyway. Like sometimes you have to make your own mistakes. And I asked that question to you on the podcast, that do you think you actually have to get to the edge of your boundary to ask, oh, I'm not feeling fulfilled or happy here? Or can you just learn from conversations like this? You can definitely cut your learning curve and maybe veer off path and go back on. But again, there's no one size fits all. I wish there was on that. For me, it's 100% came down to maturity. It's the figurative banging your head off a wall so long before you realize you just need to stop banging it, or it's not going to stop hurting. That's what the status game felt like for me, because there's one of my friends said to me, I put in Rewire Your Mindset, my second book, there's always a bigger dick out there. That's his line that I love.
Go.
Yeah.
Rob me a copy and all.
Yeah, rewriting your story.
Go check it out.
Like there's always a bigger dick out there. There's always somebody with a more attractive spouse, more money, more followers, bigger ass, bigger boobs, better six pack, bigger arms, always. And that's why the competition of one on how you're doing, which can also be a dangerous game, don't get me wrong, because if you're comparing against your past self, my past version ran through the Sahara, ran through the Arctic, ran 100-miler. As I come into a new season, I have to be less judgmental to myself, that I'm like, actually, my knees are hurting and my hips hurt if I do that kind of mileage regularly. And I'm also training hours a day when I have other things that are a higher priority. I have to be very non-judgmental in that. Like I wouldn't judge a tree's leaves for falling off in autumn. So I need to not judge myself for moving into a different season of life as well. I think everybody's like that.
Yeah, Marcus Aurelius has the Meditations, which if anyone hasn't read it, maybe don't read it, read some commentary on it. It's a hard enough read. Mm-hmm. But the basic premise of somebody who had anything you can aspire to have, as many women as you could have, as much riches as, you know, creative outlets, arts, whatever you wanted, flick the fingers, one of the greatest emperors of all time has had it. I kind of had my version of this. The Buddhists have this idea people come into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. Mm-hmm. And I had someone came into my life for a season, billionaire, got to hang out with him quite intimately for a period of time. And I got to see up close and firsthand how money just doesn't solve the problems. And that probably derailed me from the direction I was going, saying, put everything off, focus solely on financial, because this is the big domino. If you crack financial, you're going to be happy, you're going to be skinny, you're going to have amazing friendships, you're going to have amazing pastimes. I seen someone who had cracked this by modern standards almost better than anyone has ever cracked it. Yet he didn't have any of those things that I thought I was chasing. And I'm like, whoa, that's interesting. So I started exploring then, well, what are the other things I've put up on a pedestal that I think, if I get that, I'll be happy? And going, actually, there's someone that has that and he's not happy. So then you start to kind of reevaluate what are those big items you're chasing in life, and maybe they're actually not the secret to happiness.
I had nearly an identical, even though it wasn't money, but the aha moment was nearly identical. A line I love is that, and we're both very lucky with our financial backgrounds, and we've got freedom, and there's definitely a base level of money that people need to feel secure, because the people that talk about money's not important to the people with it, because when you don't have it and you can't, and I've been broke, I went broke twice setting up my business. Like when you can't actually afford food for your table, thankfully it never happened with my daughter, but for me, where I just couldn't wait, I couldn't eat until I got paid again. I was like, I can't go to Sainsbury's when I was in the UK. I was like, I have no money, so I just have to wait till I get paid. So money doesn't solve all your problems, but it solves all your financial problems, and it'll open up a lot of doors. My equivalent of that was when I was doing the Worlds in Vegas in 2015. So it was the Fitness Model World Championships in Vegas, and it was a few months after my daughter was born. And I remember I was over there, and similar to you, I met this guy who I'd been following on Instagram for probably a year at that point, who I really looked up to. He was in the same competition as me, and I was like, oh my God, I was so nervous. Like I was looking at this guy over here. This was when I was at the early stage of my business. I was like, I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to talk to him. I was like psyching myself up to go talk to him. So this guy was incredible shape. He had 1 million followers on Instagram in 2015.
Whoa.
Which is the equivalent to probably 10 or 15 million today.
Like Instagram launched in 2012.
He was insane. He was one of the biggest. He was a UK guy, one of the biggest in terms of the amount of followers at the time. And I remember thinking, this guy has it all. So I went over and I was chatting to him, and he was lovely, really, really nice guy. But he was telling me about how he was still living in his parents' house and how he couldn't figure out how to make money from his social media, and that he only had a handful of clients for personal training. And I had this moment where I went, fuck, I thought this guy had everything. I thought he'd have money, status, followers, happiness, and he still hadn't figured even the financial side out, the wealth accumulation side out, to monetize his audience. And that's when I stopped putting people on pedestals, because I had this guy up here. If you told me at that moment I could switch lives with this guy before having met him, I would have taken it like that. I wouldn't do that now, because it's weird. Comparison syndrome is really weird, because we compare in vacuums. We think life is a pick and mix, and comparison isn't a pick and mix. If I want to trade my life with you, Anthony, or with Wes, or with anybody out there, insert influencer or person here, I have to take everything. And then I also have to give up all my stuff. I have to give up my daughter. I have to give up my girlfriend. I have to give up my family. I have to give up the work that I love. And I have to take on all the anxieties that other person has. Yes, I can take their bank account, or I can take their body, or I can take their relationship, but I have to take everything, the good, bad, the ugly that's in their life as well. When you look at it with that perspective, you tend to not want to swap as fast.
Even for a day.
Even for a day. I wouldn't take it. Like, realistically, look how much you love your life, how much I love my life, based on years of trial and error and course correcting and having periods of, I know you had depressive episodes more so than depression. I had depression, like when I was living life massively out of alignment. And I wouldn't go back to that, but also I wouldn't trade it now for anything. I wouldn't trade what's happened. Your mess becomes your message. And sometimes when you're feeling that comparison, you compare in isolation, and that's not helpful either. Putting people on pedestals because we don't see you become the Wizard of Oz. People think it's this big flashy life, but everyone's just the fucking sweaty man behind the curtain. That's how life actually is. And that's a really important perspective to take, so that you can knock yourself out of that comparison mode and knock yourself out of putting people on pedestals.
Yeah. Did you take testosterone in your bodybuilding career?
I experimented with a lot of different performance enhancing drugs during that period. Some
You're not going to name them, because you named them in take one.
I name them in take one, and this is actually a redo, which I never do on podcasts, but I'm very mindful of naming out things that are potentially going to be harmful for people, and performance enhancing drugs are in that bracket, because sometimes, and I took them, not my first show, I did my first show natural, and then I went on them after until the Worlds in Vegas, and on and off, depending on cycles, most of which were stimulants and fat burners, but again, not naming names because it ends up giving an unintentional prescription for people. And the reason we're doing a take two here is because when you name them out, I need to put my hand up here. When I was in that world, when I would hear influencers or people talking about what they took, that's what gave me ideas on what to take. And we have a responsibility, because cycling and bodybuilding, I think, are very heavily drug based.
Cycling's moved past it now.
Okay.
I'm very hopeful for the future of cycling. I have some friends at the highest levels in cycling. They tell me it's possible to win clean.
Yeah. With bodybuilding, you can't.
Yeah.
I remember my first ever show, I came fourth with 30 guys in my first ever show. And I remember talking to the guy who won, and we were backstage, and he looked incredible. And I was looking at him going, wow, that guy looks amazing. And then he started telling me his drug cycle. And I remember sitting there in a bathroom looking in a mirror going, fuck. I was like, I haven't done everything I could do to win here. And I remember I came fourth and I was happy. It was my first ever show.
Are they legal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, in bodybuilding, you're not allowed to do drugs in a natural federation. But I didn't go into a natural federation. I was in just an open. So some were taking drugs, some weren't. And like I started taking them then literally the next week. I was talking to other guys in the gym who used them and started going down that route. And that's for me, it was horrible because of the amount of stimulants. I went more stimulant based, so my nervous system was fried, because getting body fat really low for me was the hardest part. I actually put on size really easily.
But they all work on the premise of trying to upregulate your base metabolic rate, so you're just running core temperature a little bit higher all day long.
Yeah, they work in different ways. They work off different receptors. Some are working off your thyroid, some are working off just pure stimulant in terms of the amount of calories you burn from the internal thermogenesis, and others are appetite suppressants. So it works in different ways.
The interesting part with this is, because there's undoubtedly people that'll listen to any podcast and they'll take partial information and run with it. But where do people turn for trusted sources of good information about that type of stuff?
In terms of performance enhancers in particular?
Yeah, because there's a certain amount of people that are on, they're you at 23 years old. And you try to piece it together. And I'm thinking of the cyclists back in the day who, so many of them passed away with experimentation of EPO, heart rate getting so low that it stopped during the night. And it's similar to how we're seeing fentanyl strips being handed out into nightclubs to test cocaine. It's like, yeah, we all agree you shouldn't be taking cocaine on a night out, but we also don't want people to be penalised with the death penalty for taking cocaine.
That's a great question. So a combination, one of the things I started doing, which I still do to this day, and I haven't used any performance enhancers. It's 26 I started and 28 I finished, and I haven't taken any since, so coming up to 10 years. But I started getting my blood work done, and I actually started that because of recommendations from other bodybuilders, and it's something I still do to this day, like an NCT for your body, just getting the feedback. I also used a book which is called Anabolics by William Lewin. So it's an academic book on all the different performance enhancers, from testosterone and EPO to the other stimulants that you might potentially take, the ones that we've mentioned here. And what it does is it's a medical breakdown of what happens, the dosage and what happens at different levels, the side effects to be mindful of. And that was a very useful. Now I was 26, so I was kind of had a bit more cop on than if I was 21, 22. And I wanted to make sure whatever I was doing wasn't going to impact me negatively over the long term. And again, focus group of one, that was my approach combined with the blood work. Now my blood works came back for me, without going into details and naming any, because most of what I did was all oral based, my liver enzymes were shocking during that period of time, nearly alcoholic level bad. And part of that was my daughter was born when I was 27, about to prepare for the Worlds in Vegas. And I remember thinking, I'm cutting probably 10, 20 years off my life here. For what? And that kind of gave me a little bit of a wake-up call. Now, I'm not pro or anti-drug in federations where it's legal, but you have to consider the health risks. And at least if you've done that and you've decided, okay, this might increase my risk of heart disease, this might increase my risk of prostate cancer, this might reduce my life expectancy by 10, 20 years. If you're an adult and your prefrontal cortex is developed after 25, 26, and you decide to do that, that's all up to you. But I'm very mindful that you'll get the 19-year-old, the 20-year-old, the 21-year-old who listen and go, well, he did that, he's fine now.
Yeah.
And then they end up doing 1 + 1 = potato.
The challenge with this is athletes are broken. Have you seen this study where they ask Olympic athletes if you could take a pill and it would guarantee you a gold medal, but you would die 12 months later?
Yeah.
What percentage of them would take it? It was 100.
Scary. It's scary. But the problem is when you're in it, very similar to when you were in that workaholicism, multiple businesses, pro cycling, but not happy with what you're doing. We get so tunnel visioned and blinded to what's going on. I always call it blinded by ambition. Like I always have to picture ambition like a pet tiger, because I have a lot of natural ambition, but it's like a pet tiger. That's a really cool thing to have, walking around in Clontarf with a pet tiger. To be deadly.
For an Instagram picture.
100%, it'd be a great one. But also you don't pay attention, that tiger's going to bite your fucking face off.
Yeah.
Ambition can be a bit like that. And if you are a type A or a high achiever or someone that has something to prove, whether it's low self-esteem, which happened to me, it's why I was in the bodybuilding world. My self-esteem started to drop and I thought this would help pick it up and raise it. It actually didn't. It made it worse. But I didn't know that at the time. You don't know what you don't know. And you have to be very mindful, because blinded by ambition is dangerous. A little bit of ambition is incredible. It gets you out of bed, makes you excited to do the things you're doing. But too much of it means that you can end up burning the figurative grass at your feet, the family members, the friends, the relationships, and that's generally not worth it.
Oh, it breaks your brain. I remember coming off descent in a bike race, got over the top of a category 1 climb, which is the hardest climb. Maybe 20 of us left in the front group. This was a big breakthrough ride for me. Starting the descent, it was a wet, slippy descent. You could be hitting speeds of 100, 110 kilometers an hour on some parts of it. So if you crash, bets are off. You're going to hospital in a helicopter at best if you crash at that speed on a bike. I can remember clear as day my thought process. If I die, I die. It's like, I'm not getting dropped out of this group. If I die, I die. And I remember even thinking, it's a cool story. You died in a bike race. And you're in the front group, you died in a bike race. That's a cool story. Not everyone gets to live that life where they died in a bike race doing something they love. That's a broken mentality, but it's so short-sighted. In my full-time cycling career, I've never totaled them up, but I'd say 7 or 8 bones. At the time, your risk perception, it's like, well, I'll go through that gap, I'll take that corner, I'll hammer that descent. If I break something, I'll be out for 8 weeks, I'll be out for 12 weeks. Now I can't squat because I can't external rotation, because I can't get my arms back. I have to do a front loader squat. You don't think about your golf swing when you're 20 years later. Like, the list of stuff you can't do when you prioritize, and this is almost a metaphor for other stuff, for business, for building personal brand, for relationships. When you prioritize just the short term to the total detriment of the long term, it can be catastrophic.
That kind of happened to me in the Arctic as well. I ran 230 kilometers through the Arctic over 5 days in 2019. I tore my Achilles 86 kilometers from the end. And I had that same mindset of, not if I die, I die. My mindset at the time was, I went into, so the Arctic is incredible. Like, it's a race with different points on different days, and you're running through the Arctic Circle line, and there's like TP set up every 10 kilometers with the local indigenous Sami reindeer tribe. So you've got these reindeer tribe people boiling water in the ice so that you can get that heated water in a special flask, so you're able to stay hydrated on the race. And I went into this tent, and there's a video or a photo, apologies, that went viral, because when my Achilles tore, you have so much water in your eyes. My eyes froze over and I couldn't blink. So my eyes went as red as the cover of that book. So I looked like a zombie or something from like a horror film. And I went into this tent, and there was a medic there, and she looked at me and she's like, your Achilles is torn. She's like, you're done. And I looked at her and I was like, what, can I move? And she's like, well, you can, but like it could rupture. And I was like, well, check my GPS. I was like, is my GPS working? And she said, yeah. I was like, cool, strap it. I was like, strap my ankle. I was like, if it ruptures, get me in a helicopter. I was like, but I'm going to keep going. And so they strapped up my Achilles and bottom of my foot as tight as you can go. I lost all feeling below my foot, and I took some codeine painkillers, and I went and I literally just pulled my foot behind me for 86K. That, I'm still very happy that I did that, because it rewired my relationship with pain. That pain is temporary and it's something that will go away eventually. Several months before that, I did a race in Barcelona, an ultramarathon that I signed up for. And it was a 78 kilometer ultramarathon that I thought, I'll breeze through this. I'm after running 6 back-to-back marathons through the Sahara several months earlier. I didn't even train. Similar to you with your race, where you rocked up a little bit fat, a little bit out of weight. Yeah. And I was like, oh, it's fine. It's 78K. I did way more in the Sahara. This is fine. I landed up in Barcelona. I thought the race was on a road. It wasn't. It was a trail race going up Mount Tibidabo to start. So it was on an incline. It had been the rainiest November in Barcelona records to date. So I had none of the equipment. I remember I went the wrong way 40 kilometers in, and I started following this other girl, which was a metaphor for my life at the time, because I was like, oh, she's pretty, follow her. So I was talking to this other girl on the race, and I ended up, she was in a different fucking race, and I ended up at a checkpoint, and they were like, you're not part of this race. I was like, you're hardly running 2 races here at the same time. They go, no, but if you go back 10K, you can pick back up where you're supposed to be. And I was like, no, fuck this. I was like, I'm out. I was like, this is crap. I was like, the girl is gone. I'm covered in muck and shit from the weather. I'm not enjoying this race. I thought it was on a road. I have my Asics trainers on. I need trail shoes. I'm done. And I went back to the hotel, and what happened to me happens to a lot of people during this period of time. I got showered. I got fed. I was lying on my bed, and I went, oh, shit. I was like, I don't feel crap anymore. I feel crap because I left the race, but I don't feel crap that I'm outside, wet, cold, miserable. And I remember thinking, if I approach the Arctic, which was 4 months from then, this same way, I'm going to die in the Arctic. So I started training harder. And when my Achilles tore, I remember how I felt in the bed in Barcelona, that I'm like, I felt like such a shadow of myself. I felt like I let myself down and everybody else down, although everyone else doesn't care. They just care how you are with them. But at the time, that was my language. So when my Achilles tore, I was using that as an anchor point. So although it rewired my relationship with pain and made me realize that all pain is temporary, it still bothers me. I do high rocks now. It's 8K and my Achilles will still flare up. So similar to you, sometimes the price is worth paying, and I wouldn't change it, but just know that prices do get paid.
And also pain may not be temporary.
It may not be temporary. That's true. Most pain, from my experience, I've been lucky enough, most pain, not all, but most in my life has been temporary.
And that's like making that judgment, like we talked about in the last podcast. It's, you know, you're flicking between states of comfort and discomfort, but the discomfort, you got to make that judgment call. You don't want the discomfort to be a life-changing discomfort. You know, if you lost your foot there, that's not a price worth paying.
No.
I spoke with Michael Esther. We talked about him on the podcast, but I'm thinking about him again because he gave me a great lesson from his time in the Antarctic. He flew in on multiple flights to get. I think he lives in Vegas, so he had multiple flights to get there. But the last flight was on this shitty twin engine plane. He said he was coming in. He said it was bumpy rides. He got some poxy packet of peanuts and a bottled water, which was warm. He said there's a little entertainment system on front. He said audio was terrible and they had 2 movies on it. So he's used to flying first class. He's pretty bougie. He's had some New York Times bestsellers. He said he was on the plane, cramped, no leg room, hating life. Like, this is the worst plane I've ever been on. What am I doing here? I hate this. Then he got to the Antarctic, and he explained that it's just life is just so difficult out there. From where they'd set up camp for him to even get water, he had to hike down this hill, get the water, dig, get the water, snow, bring it back up, boil it. Okay, there. So an hour after him thinking I'd love a cup of water, he finally has his cup of water. So he'd be sitting around the campfire like absolutely nothing to do, and he'd be reading the back of a Cliff Bar to entertain himself, going, Cliff Bar made by a dude called Cliff. That's interesting. Shockingly bored. Never known boredom like it. So he was there. I think he spent a few months there. Trip finishes. He gets back onto the airplane. He sits down on the airplane and he said, "They've movies on this thing?
Yeah.
Phenomenal. You can get water in a bottle? Yeah, a little bit warm. Phenomenal. Give me some peanuts in a bag. All I have to do is ring a bell and someone arrives with peanuts." The exact same experience viewed through a different lens totally changed his perception of it. What I got from that is maybe you don't have to go and live the experience if you live with gratitude. Do you think you need to live the experience, or do you think you can cultivate the gratitude in a vacuum?
I love that question. I think you can cultivate the gratitude in a vacuum, but I've had experiences that kind of forced me to view it differently. When I was in the Sahara doing the 6 back-to-back marathons for the Marathon des Sables, on day 3 or day 4, I can't remember which day it was, there was a sandstorm. So in Marathon des Sables, it's all self-sufficient. So you carry all your food, all your equipment on your back. You've got a venom pump within arm's reach in case you get bitten by a snake. So everything is self-sufficient, except they'll give you water at the checkpoints. Now that water is rationed. If you spill it, it's gone. So you have to wait until the next day to get more water. So you mind that like it's your firstborn child. And this sandstorm hit, and you're in a tent with, it was 8 other guys, and I'd never been in a sandstorm before.
I've never been in one.
Yeah, so
Sounds
a sandstorm it kind of is like you'd see in the movies. It's a vicious wind, but it's all sand, so you can't see anything. And what happened on that third night was the sandstorm hit. They came around and warned, sandstorms hitting, everyone be careful. So you end up packing all the stuff that was in your bag, make sure there was nothing loose, and you're in these Ziploc heated Sahara style sleeping bags. So you're zipped up like Kinney from South Park, where all you can see is your eyes. And this sandstorm hit, and I didn't know what to expect, but it was way more intense than I thought it was going to be, and it took the whole tent. So not only did it take the tent, there's spikes that are keeping the tent in place. And when the tent went, there's a guy beside me, Johnny, who the spike hit in his hand. And I could hear this screaming from beside me. Fuck, 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 fuck. And like everyone is shouting, going, everything okay? He goes, the fucking spike, my hand. And I thought, oh my God. I was like, if I get hit in the head by a spike, I'm dead. Like my life's over. I'm gone. And the sandstorm passed. Everything was blown away that wasn't lied on top of. Johnny turned out to be okay. He finished the fucking race because he's a badass from Dublin. And I got home. Well, actually, firstly, when I got back to the hotel after the race, I remember being so grateful for 4 walls and a roof.
Yeah.
I'd never had that experience before. When I got back to my home in Ireland and there was a storm outside, the first time that happened, I remember going, I am so glad I have a roof over my head. I'd never had that experience. So sometimes you get forced into it, and I never thought about that. I ran out of food on the 6th day of the marathon. Thankfully, the other racers. So like I'm not built. I'm 5'8", built like a little hobbit. Like I'm not built for ultra marathons. I'm quite short, stocky, bodybuildery build. So I was starving, and I ate all my food after 5 days that I had prepared for 6. Thankfully, some of the ultra runners gave me some of their food. It was the same with my first bowl of porridge. I remember just being so happy that I'm like, I'm hungry. I have food here. And people that live below the poverty line for long periods of time experience this, hence why they're so grateful for the little things that happen as they move forward in life. And you don't have to experience the Sahara or the Antarctic or anything extreme to get that. But to say it doesn't help would also be a lie, because for me, it definitely did.
Let's take a little bit of a U-turn, an off-ramp. I couldn't have the strength and conditioning guru on the podcast without picking your brain on some strength and conditioning stuff. I've been stepping into the gym more in the past couple of months. For a long time, I was optimizing purely for performance on the bike. Then I never really questioned what I was optimizing for. I just continued the same habits that I had for when I was optimizing for performance, but scaled them back a little bit. So I was still just riding the bike, but just riding the bike less than when I was a full-time athlete. I never started to look at, okay, now I'm not optimizing for performance, now I'm optimizing for health. And is there a different set of habits and activities that should go into that? And I've stepped into the gym as part of this new analysis. And, you know, there's a billion fitness and gym influencers out there, and there's a lot of fluff, there's a lot of fads, there's a million exercises you could do, you know, single arm isolated cable pulls, standing on
a Swiss ball, one hand behind your back, like, juggling a ball.
I watched a bit of Dr. Mike Israetel where he critiques on YouTube. Have you seen his stuff where he's critiquing he'll take Mark Wahlberg's getting ready for Sniper, here's his workout, and his PT will walk you through exactly what Mark Wahlberg done, and he's just like, absolute nonsense. Why is he wearing gardening gloves? This is absolute nonsense. But if you were stuck on an island, what's the 3 to 5 foundational exercises for strength and performance?
It's the compound lifts. It's the most unsexy and obvious answer, but the basics are the basics for a reason. You don't try and build a house without a foundation. You can't build a body or strength or performance without the foundational movements. Squat, deadlift, pull up, bench press, military overhead press, or a variation of those movements. That's it. Rinse and repeat. It's unsexy, but it's the reality. The basics are the basics for a reason, and how you do them in the gym depends on the goal. If you're trying to build up more endurance, if you're trying to get stronger, if you're trying to build muscle, how you set that up in a program depends on the context. But if I'm on a desert island and I've got access to a barbell or dumbbells, they're the movements I'm doing.
Professor Stephen Seiler is quite a renowned sports physiologist in the endurance community, specifically in the cycling community. And I had a good conversation with him where he talked about there's 3 levers you can pull when it comes to training. You can pull frequency, you can pull duration, and you can pull intensity. That's all a cycling training plan is. It's manipulation of those 3 levers. Does that same analysis apply into the gym? And if so, how do we think about pulling those levers?
Depends on the goal again. If you're looking to get fitness up fast, you're really playing with intensity. If you're looking to just build up aerobic fitness so that you're able to, have a better performance on basic things like runs and cycles, you're going to go more endurance.
Okay, maybe let's go more specific on it. So I'll ask a tangible. So you're a 35 to 45-year-old male who's neglected strength training for quite a long time. Now you're coming into the gym. You still care about performance, but you're hoping that performance is downstream from health. So you're trying to optimize for health, strength in the gym. You've 2 to maximum 3 hours a week in the gym. You still want to be good in your chosen sport, whether it's cycling, running, or Gaelic or football, but you want gym to be supportive of that.
I love that because the context really helps. I would still keep the compound lifts just because of the time sensitivity. If you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a week to train, you can obviously go with your single arm, cable, Swiss ball, row, juggle, curl, or not. With the few hours a week and you're training, assuming you can get to the gym 3 times a week, you're probably going to do something like an upper body, lower body, full body split, or maybe a push-pull leg split.
Is that the way? Yeah, that's what I wondered. Is it 3 full body days, or would you do the bodybuilder split?
It's not necessarily a bodybuilder split. It's more of an optimization split. So doing 3 full body workouts potentially works. It's just that you have to get a little bit more nuanced with what you do in those 3 days. I wouldn't repeat the 3 same days. Okay. I would do a squat on one day. I would do a lunge on another day. I would do something potentially machine based on another day so that you're able to increase the load without the risk of injury. I would do a row on one day. I would do a pull up on another day. I would do something cable based with a rope so that you're getting a little bit of secondary movers in there as well. And then I would base the full day workouts on that. The problem is time is an issue because if you think about warm up, what I love about push pull legs, so push is like push muscle groups, so like say chest, triceps, shoulders, pull is back, rear delts, biceps, legs or lower body for the most part. The warm up time doubles over, so you don't have to spend as much time in the gym. If you're training chest, your shoulders are a secondary mover, front delts particularly, so they're already warming up on that movement, so you can go straight into shoulders. And then your triceps are also warmed up, so you don't have to spend an extra 10 minutes warming up each muscle group you're training. That's why I like it as a base, just because of time. You can go in 45, 50 minutes and hit those 3 muscle groups. With upper body, and if you're doing full body, this becomes even more difficult. If you think about it logically, if you're doing squats, you have to do several sets to warm up. If you're doing back, you then have to warm up your back and then do your normal sets. You then have to do chest and warm up, and it's just more time. So in terms of efficiency, I like push-pull legs and then based around the compound lifts.
How important is the specificity in the warm-up? So for my sessions, I'm trying to generally just arrive relatively, like keeping the core body pretty warm there. Heating's on in the car. I'm well wrapped up going into the gym, doing 5 to 10 minutes light cardio just to get warm. And then if I'm deadlifting, I'm doing first set super light deadlifting, 6 to 8 reps, and then really getting into my main set of 3 sets of 6 to 8 deadlifts. And then I'm onto my squats. I'm doing 1 super light warm up weight and then my 3 sets. Do I need to be going more elaborate on my warm up?
It's important to split the warm up into 2 different things. Core temperature warm up is different from muscle group warm up. So core temperature warm up is what you've mentioned there, just getting your body warm, going on a cross trainer or a rower, etc. Same as if you're in a hot country, your core temperature is already elevated. If it's November in Ireland and it's freezing, you have to get your core temperature up, because if you start to load a muscle that's cold, its risk of tearing greatly increases. You also have specific muscle group warm up is what you're doing from the sounds of it, where you're doing that light set movement pattern, getting your nervous system ready to perform that activity, deadlift, squat, etc. I personally like and again, this is professional preference, one super light warm-up set and then a percentage of what your max is going to be, so that you're just switching your nervous system on in a more efficient way. So if you're squatting, let's say, to keep the math simple, it's 100 kilos, which is it's a big squat, but just to keep the math simple, you might do a warm-up set with the bar, so that you're getting the biomechanical movement warm-up in terms of the muscle groups that are going to be recruited, and then you're doing a 25 to 50% of what the 100 would be. So you're doing 25 kilos or 50 kilos for a warm-up, and potentially, if it's a big compound lift like a squat or a deadlift, you're probably doing a second one of those. So you're going bar, 25% of your 10 rep or 6 rep max, 50% of your 6 rep max, and then your 2 to 3 working sets. That's how I like to do it, because it reduces the risk of injury, and it also increases the chance that you'll have heavier lifts performed with better form, because you've switched on and activated your nervous system and muscular system to perform that movement, and you're increasing the load each set.
And I assume at some point there's a tipping point where you're actually taken away from, because you're trying to minimize fatigue while still warming up, but at a certain point you're taking fatigue into warm-up, which is now detracting from your main set lift.
And that's where you play around then with your warm-up sets. So you might not go even to 50%. You might actually just keep it on 25 and do it twice, and then have a longer rest period in between. Depends on the goal. If the goal is strength, you're obviously going to have longer rest periods, so your recovery is going to be higher. Whereas if you're doing hypertrophy, you're going to be resting for a minute, 90 seconds. Your goal is muscle building, so that becomes less important, because that's about the load requirement and the rest periods in terms of the parameters. With strength, the rest period is going to be longer. So the downside of going heavier for a strength phase of a program is you have to go heavy to fail at 5 reps, 6 reps, etc. So you need to be really careful that you don't get injured with that. So it's a little bit of a scale. What's going to be the lesser of two evils, where yes, you'll probably go heavier if you just do the bar and then straight into your max set because you're fresher, etc. But that your risk of injury also goes up with that, because you haven't primed your nervous system or your muscular system for that amount of load, especially if it's a very heavy weight, which is relative. So it's a little bit of a, where do you take the trade-off?
I'll look at some big data on endurance sports and what determines long-term success outcomes. If you were to pin it down to one key attribute that determines long-term success outcomes, it's frequency. The thing that most often undermines frequency, it's intensity. So someone does too much intensity, now they get injured, they get sick, they get burnt out, and now they can't get the frequency. So what actually matters much more than your ceiling is your floor. So you don't want to have weeks where you're doing zero. You want to keep the zeros off the scorecard, because the zero on the scorecard contributes on the downside much more than the 80 or 90 contributes on the upside. So it's really unsexy, like we talk about that, just consistently. Where's that balance in that keeping zeros off the scorecard with trying to hit max lifts, like 1-2 rep stuff?
A little bit. I can only speak first-hand experience here, because when it comes to the combination between max lift to benefit an endurance-specific athlete, I don't work in that space.
More optimized for health if you look at your athletes.
Okay. Apologies. Okay, so in that sense, it's slightly different. When it comes to a max lift, if your goal is health, you don't really need to be doing 1 rep maxes.
Okay, risk reward doesn't make sense.
It doesn't make sense, and the risk is high. If you think about it logically, gravity is undefeated champion in most things, and a squat, the downside is very high. Deadlift, you wouldn't think it'd be as high because you think the bar won't move, but your body will snap faster than the bar. And going with 1 rep, and 1 rep is a must for powerlifters. If you're a powerlifter, you're training for 1 rep. Even strongmen rarely go to 1 reps. They will sometimes, but only on occasion. For health, the same as a deadlift. I don't deadlift at all anymore. And it's an incredible exercise. I mentioned as one of the desert island moves. I don't deadlift at all because the risk to reward for me isn't great when performance is the goal. And I deadlifted for a decade, and now I don't need, my back is actually overdeveloped as it is.
Yeah. So
I don't deadlift anymore. And I don't have the same level of strength needs. I'm also quite naturally strong. I struggle to, my aerobic is something that if I don't run, this is mental. I literally, when I did the 100-mile ultramarathon in Vegas, the fittest I ever was aerobically was for that race, because I trained really well for it. The race went really well. And 4 weeks later, I took a break from running and went back to do a 5K and I was dying. It's as if I go back to zero.
But you can start at a higher point in the gym.
Yes, and it comes back quickly. That's the difference. It comes back quickly. But my strength never drops. I can take weeks off the gym and my strength never decreases.
I'm the exact opposite. I can do that with the bike, but if I take 2 weeks off the gym, like I'm 50% of what I was.
And that's genetics. That's the different genetics on both sides. People tend to fall on one of two sides. And I'm on one side, you're on the other side, and then there can be people in the middle as well. So it's important. But with health, a goal for health, you'll generally see even with strength, you're talking 4 would be the lowest reps you'd go to, but more likely to be 5 or 6 reps, heavy with good form.
I was watching Dr. Peter Attia. I think he was talking to Dr. Rhonda Patrick about grip strength. And grip strength being this leading indicator for longevity. And it got me wondering, is this a correlation causation? Is it grip strength that makes someone live longer, or is it the activities that we do to give us grip strength? Squatting, deadlifting, farmer's carries, kettlebell work, bench pressing, all which require great grip strength. Is that what actually makes us live longer? So essentially is the question, if I sit down in my living room with one of these old school 1980s grippers, am I going to live longer?
I came to the same conclusion as you when I saw that research and that study. My first thought, and again, I like to disconfirm my own beliefs because that's a good way to approach things, particularly with any evidence-based approach with fitness, nutrition, training. But my first thought, which I haven't really changed my mind about, was the causation correlation. That if you use the example of squeezing one of those wrist strengtheners, that's not going to improve if you think about it logically, especially because you could eat McDonald's several times a day and be overweight and have super strong grip strength. But the problem with data in studies like that aren't meta-analysis and that are independent, which is unusual because Dr. Rhonda Patrick normally talks specifically about meta-analysis, but I think this was an exception. And it's, as you said, all the things that lead to that. You're doing your farmer's carries. There are people that are lifting and have other priorities in life. It's unusual, and I don't want to start painting a picture that's potentially not there, but if you lift regularly, there's a good chance you're a bit more mindful with your food.
It's habit stacking.
It's habit stacking, and then the same with your sleep. So that's what's so interesting. Like, so it's not the Popeye forearms equals longevity. It's, well, Popeye eats a lot of spinach and Popeye sleeps and he lifts and he, I don't know, bangs Olive or whatever the thing he does to keep them happy.
Popeye was a very rapey show, if you think back to it.
Very, very rapey
Just
show.
Olive was constantly under sexual assault.
100%. That's one of those things. I think that's why it doesn't get shown anymore, because it's one of those things that just hasn't aged well at all.
I've noticed grip strength for me, though, is a limiter. I had a friend of mine who's a big S&C guy come down to the gym with me, and I'm deadlifting like around 100 kg at the moment, and he was like, you can deadlift way more than that. Your grip's just giving up.
Yeah.
So grip strength, while it might not be the tip of the spear for driving longevity, at some point it can be a limiter for us doing the activities which give us the longevity.
It's the weak link theory is grip strength on deadlifts. They call it weak link theory, which makes perfect sense. You're only as strong as your weakest link.
Yeah.
If you're trying to pull 100 kilos from the ground, your back, your legs, your glutes, they can potentially fire and do that. But where you're gripping the weight is the closest point and where the breakdown will happen. That's why you see a lot of people using wraps and things along those lines, because you can still increase the load and it's not using the weakest point, because in theory you could probably do 120, 140, 150, but if you can't grip it, it doesn't matter. But unless you're trying to max out a deadlift, I would argue it doesn't. Also, you can do like mixed grip.
Yeah, I've started on the mixed grip.
Which helps a lot, yeah.
Is it worth trying to dead hangs, farmer's carries to strengthen that grip?
Yeah, 100%. If the goal is to improve the grip strength, like there's certain movements that'll do with that. Like a farmer's carry, dead hangs, they're great movement patterns that'll do it. Putting those in, the problem is with something like forearms, they're a small muscle group. So actually building the strength and building any sort of excessive gain, and that can take quite a long time versus something like back or quads or glutes, which are quite big muscle groups. So it's just aligning the expectations accordingly, but they definitely won't do any harm. Again, it's one of those things I haven't heavily focused on, but in theory, it's 1 + 1 = 2. You want to improve your grip strength on deadlifts, do supportive exercises that'll do that, the same as on bench press, same as on squat. Do other stabilizing base exercises, working on the weak chain, and that's going to improve the overall lift.
Yeah, because I've been trying to deconstruct the chin up and figure out what are the parts in that. And it's like this is total bro science now. You can totally debunk this. But I was thinking, if you can't lat pull down your body weight, I just don't see how the maths don't match on how I'm going to be able to lift my body weight in the same motion from a bar.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Again, I can't speak to the evidence behind it because I haven't checked the research in the lead up, but it makes sense what you're saying, but also it's not equal. So just because I can lat pull down 120 kilos 10 times, in theory means I should be able to do 15 strict pull-ups based on the math of an 80 kilo body, 85 kilo body. That's normally not what happens. You get people that will be able to do a machine. Machines are really, and lat pull down is a machine, but other machines like presses or leg press is the one that tends to really get people. People are like, oh, I did 120 on the leg press. I'll do 120 on a squat, and then bang.
Too many supporting muscles there.
All the stabilizers. You're not using any of the stabilizers. You're stuck into a machine. Machines, although have a place, and if you're a bodybuilder, they're really good for isolation, but machines were designed for muscle rehabilitation.
Yeah.
So that's what they're for. So if you're trying to build overall longevity, health, and just general fitness, compound lifts or mostly barbells, kettlebells, dumbbells, free weights are going to give you a better bang for your buck.
How do you approach body recomposition? Someone who wants to drop a weight and add strength at the same time.
Training and nutrition. So when it comes to body composition or recomposition, that's mostly nutrition. If it's weight loss and fat loss. So weight loss is a different thing to fat loss. Fat loss is reducing the amount of adipose tissue fat in your body. Weight loss is reducing the numbers on a scale. So they're not always going to be the same thing. So it's important, if you're following a strength-based program, you might be reducing body fat and building lean muscle tissue, which means that the weight won't stay or won't go down. It might stay the same. That's really common. That's body recomposition versus weight loss. When fat loss is the goal, it's nutrition overall, but it's not only nutrition. So you control calories, you control your macros potentially, make sure you're getting everything you need, your nutrient density in your food, your calorie deficit in some shape or form, or you don't have to, you can lose body fat in a maintenance as well. And you can lose body fat in a surplus. It's just harder because you can increase your metabolic rate. There's two ways to lose body fat. One is controlling calories. It's thermogenesis 101. You eat less calories than your body needs and it taps into store fat for fuel. That's one way. The second is you increase your metabolic rate. So you're burning more calories while you're resting. They're the two ways of doing it. One is control of nutrition. The other is effectively making money while you sleep. It's burning calories while you rest. You do that with your strength training, resistance training, etc. So they're the two ways to burn body fat. In the fitness industry, you hear calorie deficit, calorie deficit, calorie deficit, calorie deficit, and there's truth to that for sure, but it's not the only way. So it's important for that caveat. Also, it's not all about controlling for calories. If you use really poor quality foods and your macro splits all over the place and your hormonal function isn't optimized and you're not sleeping well, even if you control the calories, you might potentially have a weight loss or fat loss stall or potentially increase it. So context matters as well.
I've heard muscle described as all of us in our working life, we try and squirrel some amount of money into a pension fund until at 65, you hope you've squirreled away enough money that you can live from 65 to your death as comfortable as possible. I've heard muscle is a similar gain where you need to be putting on as much muscle as you can until you hit about the age of 50 because it gets difficult to build muscle after that. At that point, you kind of are where you are. You're not earning any more muscle. And now you have to hope you can hang on to enough muscle to maintain standard of life, the exercise you like to do until your deathbed. Do you agree with that? And should everyone be in the gym then?
For longevity, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a health pension. You're investing in your health pension that way. With the decrease in muscle tissue, and it's actually disturbing how accurate this is across the board, how much muscle we tend to lose post 45, post 50, post 55, post 60. It's not that you can't build muscle in those age ranges. You can. It's just harder. And it takes a lot more effort. So similar to the analogy you gave of saving up money, you can still earn a lot of money in your 50s and 60s, but you're kind of hoping you did most of the work at 20, 30 to 40 to 50 so that you're actually able to retire at 65. Your weight training and resistance training is very, very similar. And when people ask about longevity protocols, and you mentioned Peter Attia earlier, David Sinclair, who I've had on the podcast as well, people who are like leading experts in longevity, the research is really clear on this for the training side, is make sure you're lifting 3 times a week. I had a age reversal expert, Alex Pazio, I can never pronounce his surname. He was on Tom Billio's Impact Theory, and I came over from mine from there. And he was speaking about the 3-day-a-week protocol. He was like, you do your 3 days a week, you lift heavy, and if you're at the age or don't have the injuries to be able to sprint, do some form of sprint training. It doesn't have to be on a treadmill or outside. It can be on a bike or a cross trainer. But they're the 2 longevity protocols. 3 times a week training, normally compound lifts or lifting something heavy in that 5 to 6 rep range, having a nice break in between so that you're able to do it with perfect form, and then having sprint-based training. They're the 2 studied and long-term approaches for longevity when it comes to the actual training side of things.
I love that, because we're in this marketing culture of just do this, whether it's, and some of these things are great and they do have some good science behind them, whether it's red light therapy, sauna exposure, cold exposure. But to rob one of your phrases from our first podcast, they're the supplements. That's this stuff on the edges, the foundational stuff. It's not glamorous, it's not sexy. It's like show up 3 times a week, do really long zone 1, zone 2 stuff, baseline movement. Some really hard stuff where you're pushing max heart rate, VO2, holding on to as much VO2 as you can. It's, you know, in the cycling endurance world, that's the equivalent to the muscle bank. You're trying to pay into that VO2 bank until you're 50, because that decline is huge after 50. And I'm not sure if you've seen the research on people that break their hip and their likelihood of dying in the next 12 months. It's massive. And like, to stop you breaking a hip, like all of us will stub our foot multiple times in a day, but you have the speed, you have the endurance, you have the reaction to get that foot out. So it becomes a stumble and not a fall. But if you don't have that when you're 50, when you're 60 and you go down and you break a hip, the data is not on your side for how good your recovery is going to be.
No, it's actually scary how, and it's one of those things, because sometimes you read research and you're like, oh, that's interesting, I didn't think about it like that. That was one of those research where you're like, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah,
makes perfect sense. And also when you think about your resistance training, the increase in bone density, like, so from a muscular standpoint, from a bone density standpoint, and just longevity overall, again, it's one of those things that there's so much evidence on this that is weird and unlikely to change dramatically. There might be things in between. They'll say go to 3 days a week or 3.5, or maybe add in another zone too. The science changes. That's the nature of science. But this has been studied quite well for quite a while now, that it's not going to change dramatically. It's not like Ozempic, or it's not like, you know, certain supplements that are relatively new that we think it's like this, but it actually might be like that. This is something that's been pretty trial and tested.
My mom had a problem with her colon, pretty serious. She was critical for a while, and then thankfully got out with that and pulled through. And as part of her rehab, she came and she moved in with me, and she was totally inactive for probably a month. Now, she hadn't got, she's fit and she's healthy, she's walked and she's moved and she's ride her bike her whole life, but she's now approaching her 70s. And so she didn't have a huge baseline amount of muscle. And I got to watch, even over that period of a month, how someone that doesn't have a high baseline goes from healthy but skinny to frail with that muscle atrophy. And it really opened my eyes to how fast muscle atrophy happens. And we need to give ourselves a buffer. Like, you need to have some sliding zone for you to have that period of your life where you don't have great health for, like, if that had been a 6-month convalescence, that goes from frail to danger zone pretty fast.
The thing is, what makes that really interesting is, you've heard of muscle memory theory, I'm sure, as an athlete, where, you know, you stop training for a while and then the muscle has the memory and it comes back quite quickly. That also decreases with age. So you, as you mentioned, are trying to stack the odds in your favor, that if something happens like that, where you are going to be inactive for a month, you have enough in the bank that will get you through it, because even when you start back training, there will be an element of muscle memory and it all kicking back in again, but that gets considerably harder the older you get.
Have you seen this regression analysis research where it looks at, if you list something that like everyone wants to do under 70, stand up out of a chair without needing help, or without having a weird, you know, posturing off your left arm or something. If you want, I'm pulling these numbers out because I can't remember the exact stats, but someone can look it up in the comments and they'll drop it there. So it's, if you want to be able to do insert activity when you're 70, lift a suitcase over your head or stand up out of a chair, we'll use the stand up out of a chair analogy. You can regression analysis as to what amount, what exercise and what amount of weight you need to be able to lift at each age based on expected atrophy rates for you to be able to do it. And it's shocking. Like, you need to be able to squat like 100 kg at 35, or you're not going to be able to stand up out of a chair at 70. And it's like, when I seen that research, I was like, I can't hit any of those numbers. I need, like, I want to be able to lift suitcases. I want to be able to take the lid off a jam jar. Like, it's worrying.
I haven't seen those. That I'm going to check those out off the back though. That is, I would imagine, a scary realization, similar to the moment when you wouldn't step on the scale and you didn't want to check your power output on the bike. You're like, just ignorance is bliss, ostrich head in the sand. I feel like just having the information is important, and then you can kind of make adjustments accordingly. And
just to wrap up this conversation, Brian, I got asked this question at the end of a podcast appearance I had last year, and I don't think I had a good answer to it. What do you know now that you wish you knew at the start of your fitness and entrepreneurial journey?
Oh, I like that question. I'd have to answer it in two different ways though, because the entrepreneurial journey and the fitness journey were two different journeys. With the fitness journey, less is more would have been my answer, because I've historically always been a more is more with training. And it led to some external success with bodybuilding because I could train multiple times a day. I did okay in endurance because I could train for multiple hours. But more isn't more all the time with training. And because of my background now with strength and conditioning, with nutrition, working with people, I'm more mindful of the research and then taking what's applicable and adjusting what's not. But I was I won't even say bro science. I just assumed doing more equaled more.
So now you've changed to, you're looking for an adaptation rather than just ticking off completed boxes.
100%. And on top of that, I would also say that your training is more for your mental health than your physical health.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, that's for me now. It's been mindful that it's the mental side that serves the most benefit. It's the real accelerator, force multiplier for me. So it needs to be in my life in some shape or form always. I didn't have that awareness when I started. Now I started my fitness journey probably earlier than most. I was lifting weights at 13. I was in a gym at 16, and I've been going to the gym 5-6 days a week for 20, what's that, how many years? I can't math the math. 21 years. Very unsexy when people are like
how would you get in shape?
100%.
21 years, 5 days a week.
I had a lad ask me in the gym in the sauna one of the days. He was like, he goes, "You the fella that do the ultra marathons?" I said, "Well, I'm a fella who does ultra marathons. I don't know if I'm the fella you're referring to." He goes, "You're Branky Fitness." I said, "Yeah." He goes, "How are you so big?" And I was like, oh, "Well, I train well and I eat well." Ah, jeez. He goes, "And you're able to do those marathons?" I said, "Well, I've done them in the past when I trained for them, yeah." He was like, "What do I have to do for that?" I said, "Well, like, I've been doing it 21 years, 5 days a week." And he went, "Oh." And his face just dropped. And I was like, yeah, it's not. I just looked at him and I was like, it's not so impressive when I tell you, is it?
The best part of that is you don't even have a name anymore. You've graduated to having a title. It's you're D. Brian Keane Fitness.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah. So, and it was that was it. That's literally true story that happened about 2 months ago. And it's not sexy when you hear it. And that's the thing. Like, when I do ultra marathons and I was doing those events, I still held all my size and muscle, and people couldn't figure that out. I tried to drop size. I did everything in my power to lose weight and size for the 100 miler in Vegas, in Nevada, because I'm like, I can't be carrying 83 kilos of blocky muscle around a 100-mile race. And I couldn't. I went calorie deficit. I stopped lifting.
Genetics are wild for that though. We had a runner on last week, Anthony O'Brien, and I used to ride the bike with him. He's moved across to running in the last year, and he's putting down some good times. Like, he's I think around 14:40 5K. And in his words, real dub, he's like, "Bro, I haven't done a bicep curl in 6 years." And he's painted into his t-shirt.
Yeah.
Just can't shred it.
No, genetics are that's a real thing. And also, when I got into ultra marathons in 2017 arguably, when I signed up for the first one, I've been lifting for 18 years more at that point. You don't lose muscle just because you stop lifting for 3 months to prepare for a race when you've been doing it for 18 years. So that's important. Back to the bank you mentioned earlier. That's the fitness advice. The entrepreneurial advice will be slightly different. I've changed my mind a lot on this. You have to find fun in your work. And I went through a phase where work felt like a chore, and training was the same. So there is actually overlap here. when I would train for bodybuilding shows, I'm a fitness person. I love to work out. I love to push myself. I love CrossFit workouts. I love training hard. I love lifting weights. I love that. Running, I'm not a big fan of because I find it very, very difficult in terms of a movement pattern. I love the bike. I love the rower, but running I'm not great with. So I do it for other reasons versus the actual enjoyment. With training for bodybuilding shows and then with ultramarathons and adventure races after that, there's a point on a spectrum, on a scale, where training goes from fun to a chore. And I was blissfully blind to where that point was regularly. And I had to bring awareness to that. But also the same thing happens in work. Similar to what you said, we have actually lived nearly parallel lives in this when it comes to like I can work multiple hours a day and people are always shocked when I tell them I work about 20 hours a week. And because they're looking at content and multiple podcasts and books and clients and stuff like that. And I'm like, I do about 20 hours a week of hands-on work. You're thinking about it after because you're an entrepreneur and you're like, oh, I got ideas, and that technically doesn't count. But so I don't work an awful lot because I could work 60 hours a week. I have worked 60 hours a week in the early stages. I did the 60, 70 hours where you did more work than sleep. And that's fine in the beginning, and it got me from 0 to 1, probably got me from 0 to 3, to be honest. But what got me there couldn't get me to the next stage because I would burn out regularly. And it's back to what you talked about there, the floor. I would have days of 0 and weeks of 0 because I was so burnt out. So with work, for me, advice to myself was look for the fun and know that it's very fun to a point. This is extremely fun today because we got to do 2 podcasts. You were on mine, I'm on yours. I've got a couple of email things I need to do later, and that's it for the day. That's really fun. But if I had 7 podcasts and 10 client check-ins, that's a busy day. And it's not that fun. And there's days when you have to work out and you don't feel like it. There's days when you have to do your work and you don't feel like it. That's discipline 101. Do the things you have to do regardless of how you feel. That's a really good skill to develop. But if it's every day, it becomes a chore and then it's not fun anymore. And it might not be great advice to those listening, because if you're in the early stage and you're grinding, you can become addicted to that cortisol, addicted to that grind. But if it's not working anymore, it's time to change it. Same as anything. It's sunk cost fallacy.
It's a stimulus.
It's a stimulus. And that's it. And you need to be very mindful. I would argue that with a relationship, with the job, with your programming. If you're getting consistent days, you're like, oh my God, I'm so sick of the face of this person. Or I can't get myself out of bed to work. I hate this job. Or I can't bring myself into the gym. I'm dreading this. Something's wrong with your process somewhere. It might not be the thing that's the problem. It actually might be you're not sleeping well, you're not eating well, your energy management is out of balance. It could be something else, but
it's
there's
like
a problem.
what you do in the gym. If you go to the, we've all seen those guys who go to the gym for 10 years, 3 times a week, literally make no gains. They make gains for maybe the first month, and then they adapt it to the stimulus and then never change the stimulus. I think we look at other areas of our life, even if we're super accomplished endurance coaches, endurance athletes, strength coaches, strength athletes, the analysis we put on our strength training or our fitness life is absent in our normal life. We don't look to change the stimulus when stuff is stagnant in our normal life. And that's definitely something I've learned.
And add on to that, that's beautiful advice for me and everybody else. Don't be domain dependent with your skill set. Your skill set that allows you to analyze your fitness and optimize what's important is the same skill set that can allow you to optimize other areas of your life. And we can have domain dependent knowledge. The example I use is there's a girl in one of my gyms. I train in 2 gyms. One of my gyms who every day her workout is on a Stairmaster, and she takes the lift, avoids the stairs to the Stairmaster every day. And I have a chuckle, and it still makes me laugh. 3 years on, it still makes me laugh when I'm on the treadmill and I see her come out of the lift to go on the Stairmaster, avoiding the stairs. That's domain dependent knowledge. That's, you're doing this thing on a Stairmaster that you literally could have done on the stairs on the way up. So there's skill sets that we have in certain areas of life that will cross over. Some won't. One of the things that makes you a successful entrepreneur is you take full ownership of things. That's one of the reasons why I found my breakup so hard, because I owned all of it. When in a relationship, your 100% is only 50%.
Yeah.
And so not all of them cross over. That was something one of my best friends had to point out to me. My friend who, Paul is his name, who's what I call my truth friend. He's the, you know, I'd rather be kissed.
Paul Dermody?
Paul Dermody, yeah.
I'm on the podcast.
Yeah,
Great
yeah,
guy.
Paul's amazing. Paul's an incredible human being. And Paul is my friend I go to when I'm like, tell me if my shit stinks. Like, tell me what like, I'm not seeing something, tell me what's going on. And I remember Paul was like, you were taking way too much ownership of this whole thing. And I was like, fuck. I was like, that makes me successful in fitness. It makes me successful in business. That's making me terrible at processing a breakup. So having people around you can help, and having people mirror back the broken thinking and philosophies you have can also be very helpful. So I'll end it on that note, because domain dependent knowledge and using the skills in one area of life to be successful in another is really helpful 95% of the time. But I just wanted to add the caveat for the last 5%.
Brian, absolutely loved chatting. The Buffalo and the Storm is something that I haven't taken a nugget out of a podcast like that in a long time. I'm going to link up all your stuff in the comments, show notes down below. 2 podcasts, huge Instagram account, massive online coaching, resource and programs. It's a little empire you're building. So congratulations on that. But more importantly, thank you for giving so generously with your time today.
Mate, an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me on.